Our first speaker is Dr. Jennifer Pierce. She is a professor at the Department of Geoscience at Boise State University, where she has been since 2005. Her research focuses on wildfire landscape response to climate change and carbon storage in soils. She is committed to climate science education, outreach, and is the director of the Idaho Climate Literacy Education Engagement and Research Group. Dr. Pierce grew up in the mountains of Colorado and Wyoming. She received her undergraduate degree from Colorado College, her master's degree from the University of Oregon, and her PhD from the University of New Mexico. Dr. Pierce serves on the board of directors for the Friends of the Teton River, is the chair of the Geological Society of American Quantity Geology and Geomorphology Division, and is a fellow of the Geological Society of America, where when she's not working, she enjoys mountain biking, backcountry skiing, playing music, exploring the outdoors with her family and dogs. All right, welcome, Dr. Pierce.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I kind of toyed around with two different title slides here, and they're both true. This is one of my former students looking out over the beautiful Sawtooth Mountains that many of us love dearly. And this is a view of the Boise foothills a couple years ago. So how do we reconcile those two different images, right? Some of the titles looks like they didn't come through here. So as was stated in the introduction, I'm a professor in the Department of Geosciences. My main research interests are in soils as a solution to climate change, wildfires and post-fire erosion, and climate outreach and education. I'm going to embarrass Tom back there. Tom and I just spent all day yesterday, 250 North Junior High 8th graders at the community garden. It was so much fun. So that's just a highlight of what I do. And thanks for your help, Tom. Here are some of my students out working, studying burned soil layers. Those help us understand how fire has changed not just in the last 50 years or 100 years, but how fire has changed over the last 10,000 years. So soils really can reveal these changes, profound changes in our climate. Why do I do this? And again, sorry, some of the titles went into the ether. I do this for both, of course, us and for the next generation. What can we all do? I'm going to start off with kind of some tangibles to-dos. We can talk about it. That's the most important thing we can do to address climate change, is talk about it. So if you feel overwhelmed, like I do many times, about the magnitude of this task, the solution actually just starts with this conversation. And I'm so pleased to see all of you here right now. All of us talk about climate change in different ways. This shows examples of climate change art from a Boise High art show that took place a couple years ago. This is my PhD student Tanzila measuring soil inorganic carbon in our lab. This is an article that I wrote trying to explain to the public how fires change erosion. Those are all different ways of talking about climate change. So what is your climate action? To introduce this idea, I actually want to tell a story about Ethan, and I really would like to thank both of you so much for putting this together. So my story about Ethan it was, I don't know, a while ago now, 10 years maybe even. Ethan's my neighbor and friend, and he said, Jen, I'm just overwhelmed by climate change. I mean, it's happening, we aren't doing things. I need to retrofit my house with electric energy. What should I do? And we went out into Hulse Gulch. Many of you have probably been there for a jog in the foothills, and we're jogging along Hulse Gulch and talking about this. And I said, Ethan, you're a physician. You know more about health, than most people. Can we tie together what you do professionally and your expertise with your climate action? And we jogged along and huffed and puffed, and he said, yeah, well, okay, I'm going to think about how to do that. And in typical Ethan fashion, a week later, he'd formed the Idaho Clinicians for Climate Health organization and just catalyzed the efforts from Ethan, Stephanie, and others in this group to get this done. So that's an example of Ethan's climate action. So I would encourage all of you, and you could even take notes if you're taking notes, to ponder what is the intersection of these three things. What is the intersection of what brings you joy, your sources of satisfaction or delight? For me, here I am backcountry skiing in the mountains of Alaska wearing my climate scarf. This is my climate scarf. For those of you who haven't seen the scarf, this is a scarf that was knitted to me for me by my friend Karen, and it shows changes in temperature in Idaho from 1890. This end is 1890, and then this end is 2021. So each of these bands is the average temperature change in Idaho, right? So I showed this to all, probably, mostly 200 of those students yesterday, Tom, and they get it, right? This is a graph, but you can touch it, you can understand it. So I bring my climate scarf whenever I go anywhere, really. In this case, doing something I love. Here, something maybe that I'm not good at, but certainly Tanzila is good at, actually measuring. What do we need to do to measure how our Earth stores carbon and how we could do a better job of that? How can I use my connections with the research world and my research connections and students at Boise State? So this is, the what are you good at section. And then finally, what work needs doing? In my case, this was 2 weeks ago. We had 50 students from Boise State out in the Lost River Range. For me, what needs doing is climate education, right? So each of you have a different Venn diagram, and I encourage you to explore what that looks like. I think all of us have different strengths, joys, and interests. Okay. Don't worry, and this is, the font got changed at the bottom of this. Don't worry, the next generation will solve the climate problem. That's what many of us will say. To me, this is akin to trashing the house, having a huge party, crashing the car, and telling our kids, could you clean this up for us? Right, that's not fair, right? We're the adults in the room. This is not something that we can task the next generation with solving. Okay, the next set of slides will just kind of walk through what has actually been a tried and true progression of logic from the Yale Climate Communications Group. First one is that, like Bigfoot, right? No, I'm just joking, maybe. Climate change is real, right? So we go from it's real, scientists agree, it's bad, and there's hope, okay? And it's us. Those are the kind of the 5 tenets of how we describe this. So, first of all, it's real. Many of you have already seen this. This is from NASA. Download it before it's gone. Changes in global temperature from the late 1800s through early 1900s. I use this in many talks, especially actually my wildfire talks. It was very cool and wet in the 50s through 70s, and we were pretty good at suppressing those small fires. Now, of course, it is markedly warmer and drier, almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer globally. So it is real. This is also real. People care. This is data, again, from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Most Americans are either alarmed or concerned about climate change. So if you feel like this is something that only us in this room care about, you're wrong. Most people do care, and most people are actually alarmed. Unfortunately, who we hear from often are this very small percent, this 9% of folks who are dismissive. So just remember that most folks fall into these categories. This shows the distribution of percentage of adults who think global warming is happening. Those warm colors show you that overwhelmingly, most folks do believe that global warming or climate change is happening. Now let's get to the next one. It's us, right? So we have known about climate change since at least 1857. The first scientist to accurately measure and describe the effects of climate change was a woman named Eunice Foote. She measured how carbon dioxide would trap heat using mason jars in her kitchen and carefully controlled experiments. Then she published this in an article called Circumstances Affecting the Heat of the Sun's Rays in the American Journal of Science. So we can credit Eunice Foote in 1857 for first recognizing this. Later, in 1895, Svante Arrhenius, who is a Swedish scientist who had read her papers, wrote on the influence of carbonic acid in the air upon the temperature of the ground. Now, Svante Arrhenius was a Swedish scientist. He even went so far, and this is during a time called the Little Ice Age, when it was very cool in Europe. Svante Arrhenius went so far as to say, this is going to be great, right? The more coal we burn, the warmer it's going to get in Sweden. And boy, it's really cold right now, so I think this is going to be fantastic. So he even made that connection between burning coal and warming of our Earth. So again, we have known about this for a long time. This is, there's a lot going on in this animation, so bear with me here, but this is often the most requested graphic I get after my talks. So if you Google CO2 pump handle, you'll find this if you want to show it to your friends and relatives. What this is showing are several different things. So we're looking on the y-axis here at changes in atmospheric CO2 in parts per million. And these are the recording stations globally. The blue dot is always Antarctica, the red dot is always Mauna Loa. And as you can see, we're recording our atmospheric CO2 concentrations at more and more locations over time. The next trend you see, there are two trends right here, which I usually make my class guess. So one of them, of course, is that overall, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing over time. There's another trend in there. Do people see that seesaw pattern? Anyone know what that is? Seasons, yeah, so that's the seasons. So that's right now in the northern hemisphere, of course, all of our trees are sucking up that CO2 as they grow their leaves. In the fall, those leaves decay. So that's our seasonal trend. So no surprise to anyone in this room, atmospheric CO2 is going up. We've gone increased by about 40% from 1750, increase from 280 parts per million to over 420 parts per million in the atmosphere. So marked increase, and that may not seem like very much, right? What's a couple parts per million? Well, it turns out, of course, it can make the difference of globally 2 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature, and we're not even seeing the extent of those changes. Now, pretty quickly here, we're going to go rapidly back in time, so hold on to your hats. We're going now using the Ernest Keeling's data from Mauna Loa. Keeling thought that there was something wrong with his instruments. He was wanting to measure changes in CO2, and he said, gosh, it's actually increasing annually. He double-checked his instruments, and of course he was right. Now we're going to go back very quickly using ice core data from the Vostok ice core, 1400 AD, 1300 AD. This is showing us our pre-industrial amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere, reconstructed from little tiny bubbles in those ice cores, painstakingly extracted by thousands of graduate students across research institutions in our nation to get this data. Now, 10,000 years, 15,000 years, 20,000 years, we're looking at the last ice age, CO2 concentrations of about 185 parts per million. Now we're looking at our orbital cycles. Many people will say, and this is a very legitimate question, the Earth's climate has always been changing. How do we know that what's happening now isn't just part of a natural cycle? This is the answer to that question. So if you've had a friend or relative ask, hey, how do you know this isn't a natural cycle? We know it from this data. This data shows us that for at least the last 800,000 years, CO2 levels have gone between about 185 parts per million and 278 parts per million. Now we're at over 420 parts per million CO2. The likelihood that CO2 concentrations have increased and methane concentrations have increased to this amount, and it is part of a natural cycle, is 1 over 10 to the 135th power. So that's 1 over 10 with 135 zeros after it. So that's how likely this is a part of a natural cycle. Depending the audience, they say, oh, well, then there's still a chance. I'm like, no, that was not my point. So despite all this, you know, when we look at the percentage of adults who think global warming is caused by humans, of course, those percentages go down. They think, oh, maybe not. Scientists agree. So even though public perception is that only 45% of the public thinks there's scientific agreement on anthropogenic global warming, over 97% of climate scientists agree that humans are the cause of recent warming. I've tried to research this and put it in the context of human health, and I'd love all of your perspectives on this. This, to what my findings show, is actually higher than the correlation between smoking and lung cancer. So there's actually more agreement on the correlation between humans causing climate change than there is on the agreement that smoking is related to lung cancer. So putting this all together, most adults think global warming is happening. However, a much lower percentage think scientists think global warming is happening. For all of you who are scientists or physicians in our audience then, that's part of your talking about it, right? So let them know, you know, there's absolute agreement that scientists know that climate change is happening, right? So that can be part of our message. Okay, the caption that's missing from this is, it's bad. Okay. The first 100 days of President Trump's administration have been the worst first 100 days for climate than any other previous administration. This includes withdrawals, of course, from the Paris Climate Accord. This includes severe cutbacks on regulations against, for example, methane emissions. This includes rollbacks of every type of support you can imagine for clean energy, despite business support for clean energy. So it's bad, and I think we all know that. Here in the western US, fires are burning at higher elevations in the mountains than they ever have, arguably, before, or at least in my records, in these long-term records. This is work from my colleague Moji Sagda at Boise State. These are both from The Conversation. This is an article I published a couple of months ago in The Conversation about the downstream effects of those fires and fire-related debris flows. So fires are going to be a primary effect of climate change that we're going to feel and have already felt here in Idaho. Of course, where there's fire, there's smoke. And if you feel like we get more smoke here in Boise than other places, you're right. This shows the number of smoke wave days in terms of air pollution in the western US. Idaho really is a bullseye. I'll go a little bit into the hope part. Ethan and my colleague Moji are working together along with Stephanie and others here at St. Luke's and St. Al's to help understand the effects of that smoke on human health. So we are making headway on how smoke affects our communities right here in Idaho. And this is really going to be groundbreaking research. We're finally getting access to some of that data. Moji and his amazing grad students are crunching the numbers, and we'll be able to better prepare for those impacts in the future. So I'm really grateful to the folks in this room who have helped with that project. This is data I just got last week from Tyre Holfowitz from the Idaho Department of Land. So you might be asking, all right, Jen, you know, what are we in for this summer? Is it going to be a good year or a bad year for fire? Well, you look at this, you might think, okay, it's not so bad, right? Most of our snowpack is, you know, around normal in the state, some of it above normal. So that's good. This is not so good. So this is for this year. This is what we're looking at. Above average temperatures in the western US and below average precipitation. So this is for May, June, and July. This is for July, August, and September. So we are anticipating another bad fire year here in Idaho. sorry to say. And then these are some of these predictive services for wildland fire potential, looking into July, especially here, the Eastern Oregon and Washington. This is where our smoke will come from, and then into August. So time to get ready. I'm not going to talk about this too much because a bunch of people today are going to talk about impacts of climate change on human health. Snow. Many of us love snow, right? I love snow. My husband and dog and kids love snow. This is showing us data from Charlie Luce, who's an amazing researcher with our federal forest service right across the Boise River. Really grateful for those federal employees for generating this amazing data. This is showing that the projected snow-covered area here, this is Bogus, this is Brundage, will be at 0 by 2080, meaning there will not be snow at those places by 2080. So, sad. Dry days. So now let's talk about these impacts on agriculture. So the number of consecutive dry days will also increase in our part of the world, which does have profound effects for our agricultural communities and for how we store water, right, in our state. Low flows will get lower, so this is of particular importance for our salmonids. And again, this is great work from Dan Isaac, a fisheries biologist from the research arm of the Forest Service. All right. Oh, that graphic did show up. There is hope. All right. So when you are communicating about climate change, especially if you're talking, when I do outreach, I spend 90% of the time on this section. I think it's very important. People know climate change is happening. To pretend that it's not happening does not do a service to ourselves. It does not do a service to our young people. I think there's a tendency to try to shield our kids, like, oh, climate change distresses them. Maybe we shouldn't talk about it. As you'll hear later today, that is absolutely not the answer. What the answer is to acknowledge, I understand, this is really big and it's really scary. We know that. So now let's move on to what we can do, right? And that's what will help. Low-hanging fruit. Okay, percentage of adults who support tax rebates for people who purchase energy-efficient vehicles or solar panels, 82%. This is something the city of Boise, of course, is working towards and doing a great job at. Thank you, City of Boise people. And this is something the public supports. Okay, percentage of adults who believe schools should teach about the causes, consequences, and solutions to global warming, 78%, even here in Idaho. This is something that parents support. Percentage of adults who support regulating CO2 as a pollutant, 75%. Okay, these are real numbers. This is what, despite what you may hear from those loud dismissives, this is something that the public does support. You might be saying, well, that's the rest of the nation. Idaho doesn't really support this. Yes, we do. Look at this. 76% of Idahoans support schools teaching about global warming. 84% support for funding research into renewables, providing tax rebates, regulating CO2 right here in Idaho. So this is something we absolutely can keep moving forward on. Any guesses to how much mineable coal we have here in our state? Yes, exactly. Big goose. We don't have any coal, right? We are not going to put anyone out of work by shutting down the coal mines in Idaho because there aren't any. What we can do is put approximately 2,500 students per year from our Idaho schools into renewable energy careers in Idaho. We have wind, we have solar, we have geothermal, we have small-scale nuclear. We have all of these resources. Hydro is a huge source of our energy. So how can we dig in more? We should be the poster child for renewable energy in the United States. Not only that, but we have our public lands. This provides essential habitat for both us, right? And for these amazing creatures. This is a moose from my backyard, sorry it's blurry, in eastern Idaho. So protecting those public lands, and again, widespread support for that. We can reduce human-caused fires. Human-started wildfires account for over 84% of all fires. We can do a better job, especially in our, anywhere, but in our low elevation rangelands. We are very successful at being able to control those fires if we can get a handle on the fuels and the fire starts. And I did find this smoky. I think this is now not copyrighted by the Forest Service, but we've lost a lot of support, of course, from the Forest Service for doing this research. We need to dig in and help ourselves, right, by preventing those fires. For me in my lab, we're going to keep working on how we can better store carbon in our agricultural and dryland soils. It turns out that some of those farms in the twin, in the entire actually Magic Valley and Treasure Valley, those agricultural soils are storing a lot of carbon as inorganic carbon. How can we better support those farmers? Finally, there's hope in the next generation of Idahoans. These are pictures of my kiddos from years ago. Whenever I do outreach to schools and I have enough time to work with them on this and ask them for their climate solutions, they come up with great ideas. I taught a 4th grade class a couple years ago, and those kiddos came up with a lightning bolt catcher. I don't know if I have a picture of it. It turns out if we could harness the power of one lightning bolt, that would power the whole entire city of Boise for over a year. So, of course, the question is, how do we store that energy, right? But let's keep working on it. Those kids have great ideas. My college students have great ideas. They're going out and doing great service within their communities. They're working with the city. They're working with local agencies. They're working within the governor's office. All of these educational efforts need to continue even in the face of daunting threats to higher education and to our federal workforce. And that certainly is true for the medical community. So circling back to our own climate actions, what can all you do starting now? Talk about it. You're all smart people. You don't, just stomp up to someone and say, let me tell you about climate change, Alex. You talk about it in a way that relates to them, right? You talk about it in a way that makes sense and is meaningful to their lives. So, this is the percentage of adults who discuss global warming at least occasionally. We're looking below 20%. This is not something that most people talk about. We've got to get this back on the agenda, right? I had one of my students say, so my husband's a Cavaliers fan, unfortunately. He said, well, it's hard. He's like, you can't say hey, how about those Broncos? How about that climate change? It's not easy, because it is hard. But I think especially if you dig into the solutions that we're all engaged with, it makes it a lot easier. So I would just say, as a reminder, I'd love to see your climate action Venn diagrams. It'll be different for every single one of you. And each one of you has a special strength you can bring to this arena. At the intersection of what brings you joy, what you're good at, and what work needs doing. So I encourage you to look at those Venn diagrams. Finally, we appreciate your support with iClear. All of the money, any money donated to iClear goes directly to supporting student research in climate action at Boise State University. And so we're really excited about efforts that our students are undertaking now. So with that, thank you very much, and I have some time for questions. So.
Thank you so much for a great talk. I think my question, if I had to just pick just one, would be something you alluded to. How do you start these conversations, and how would you recommend that clinicians especially integrate these conversations into things we can do with patients? There have been some studies that looked at, there was a Wisconsin-based study that showed a pediatrician who was added a 1-minute phrase that was like the American Academy of Pediatrics recognizes that climate change is an existential threat to human health, and we know that burning fossil fuels is the biggest driver of this. Did you know that climate change is impacting your child's health? Is it things like that in a patient encounter, or is it more discussing it publicly, discussing it privately? How would you recommend we be most effective in communicating?
That's a great question, and I think that having, saying in a straightforward way, well, yeah, that climate change is happening, and it's caused by increases in carbon dioxide, which originates from us burning fossil fuels in cars, factories, et cetera. Any way you can kind of get to that, the better. I'd say that what I do, so when I'm in the checkout line at Albertsons today, if I go to Albertsons today, which I seem to go to Albertsons every day because I forget something. So today, oh gosh, isn't it a bummer about that rain? Someone might say that. I'll say, oh, I am so grateful for the rain. My garden really needs that water. And just like last year and the year before, it's projected it's going to be a really warm, dry summer. It's getting warmer and drier every year. And then the checker will probably say, yeah, it really has. I'm like, isn't that crazy? Actually, that's what I study. And it turns out it is, we're making it warmer. So it's a good thing. Anytime you're idling your car, just to, if you don't need to be idling, turn it off. Or I just say one simple solution. It's really important to reduce, you can just get your kids to turn off those lights when they leave the house and reduce your energy bill, and that'll help save electricity. So something relevant to today that you can tie it back to behavior that they can do is helpful. So for you all in the medical context, I would say if it's kids, tying it into, gosh, I really hope that sports practice they're getting their routine sports physical, right? I really hope that it's not so warm in August. That is just so dangerous for our kiddos when the heat is that high. Something as simple as that. So, yes.
Thanks, Jen. That was delightful. Jeff Thompson from Gunderson La Crosse.
Yeah, can you turn the microphone on? Sorry.
The button on top. Yes, I can. In a while. Thanks. Great opening for us. You're talking a lot about our communication. And so as we try and broaden the tent and try and help convince other people to gather in, whether it's clinicians or other folks, to not just say, yeah, this makes sense, but to actually take action. One of the things that I think we've not made traction on that gets an excuse, like your wonderful example. So it's 1 in quad billions. Oh yeah, so we still got a chance. When we say 2% or 2 degrees centigrade rise, or even a couple degrees Fahrenheit, people often dismiss it saying 2 degrees. I mean, some days it's 30-degree change per day. What is 2 degrees? And they don't understand the science. They don't understand it like you do, of course, or even like those of us that aren't quite as knowledgeable. My question is would that be an opportunity for change that and say percentage change? So instead of saying 2 degrees centigrade, it could be 11% higher or 15 or 18% higher. And then, of course, some places in the world are warming much faster. So it'll be 40% higher. The temperatures in these places will be 40% higher. The people living there, it will be untenable. Their crops won't grow. The water will dry up and those kinds of things. I'm just trying to think about language that we use to move people along and how we can get that next big tranche, and maybe you have other ideas, of the broad middle, not the people here, but the broad middle to start taking action, not just nodding and saying, oh, it's nice that those people are working on it.
That's a great point, and I could not agree more. So 2 degrees, and it's like, well, centigrade, Fahrenheit, what does that mean? So if I'm giving this talk to other folks in Idaho, what I'd say for us, so the more locally specific you can make it, when I say 118 degrees in the summer in Idaho, people pay attention to that. When I say it'll be just like Phoenix in 30 years, people pay attention to that. So that's where I couldn't agree more. That doesn't raise any eyebrows. But 117, 118 degrees sure does, right? And so putting it in those terms, I think, is absolutely the way to go. If I'm talking to farmers, I'm also then talking about that map that I showed real briefly to you guys, those consecutive dry days. What's our snowpack? What's our consecutive dry days? And now I've changed that to the folks who used to be measuring our snowpack in our mountains just lost their jobs. We don't know. We won't know next year how much snow we have for those farmers, right? And so that is now the new message. And then a lot of those producers are saying, who made that decision? I said, well, I encourage you to contact your representatives and find out, because that's now what we really need on the table.
Just to follow up, I think that's really, I love it that you end with hope. You started with the why and ended with the hope. But it is one of the keys to move. Think about senior leaders in your health system, senior docs. What are they afraid of? I mean, not that we should go all political and try and run our lives on making people afraid, but it is one of the strongest motivators. And people are afraid of 118 degrees. Yep. They're afraid of the water. They're afraid of everybody losing their jobs. And are they concerned about the polar bears drowning because there's no ice? Well, that would be unfortunate. But they're not afraid of that. What they're afraid of the turning into Phoenix and having no water and having no jobs. So to not make it all doom and gloom, but to use that as a motivating, understand who you're talking to, because it's going to be different for everybody. That seems quite effective.
Yeah, and I guess to that I would add that this session today is just going to be amazing, because you're going to hear from psychologists and folks about that communication piece. What I have experienced personally is that the people are good people. By and large, people are good people. And when folks realize this is really bad and I'm part of the problem, it's me, that is actually that guilt. Instead of making the really hard realization like, I'm part of the alcoholic. My name is Jen, and I am a contributor to climate change. That's hard. So rather than doing that, it's much easier for people to say, it's all the 5 stages of grief. It's anger, it's displacement, it's denial, it's not me, it's China, actually, right? That's easier, or it's not really happening. It's not really happening. That's much easier, right? And so it's actually stems from people having good hearts and being like, this is too much for me to take on. I'd rather just pretend it's not happening. And so acknowledging that and saying, gosh, I know this is so hard. And that's where I think then pointing to the good work by the mayor and the city and saying, you know what, I know it sucks, it's really hard, but we're doing work right here, right now. And then just move. And I've had to come to terms with, some people don't want to hear about the science. They don't want to know. They don't want to actually verbalize out loud, it's me. They'd rather not do that, but they will jump straight to action sometimes. So I'll take what I can get. So.
Don Kemper, I'm involved with Citizens Climate Lobby. And I think your talk today was brilliant, just really well done, thank you. And I want to focus on the hope side. Boise, we should all be so proud of what Boise has done in the area of geothermal. I mean, we've shown the world that you can heat a lot of things, a lot of buildings with geothermal. But there's something else about our area that is perhaps even more exciting for the future. And that scientists are now learning, and engineers are learning, that we could heat the whole Earth with the Earth's heat. That the geothermal hot rock way down underneath our soils is enough to heat all of our uses now for, I think it's 17 think it's 17 billion years. And then they say, well, the sun's only going to be around for 5 billion, so that's probably long enough. And we think that's good. But I've done a little bit of looking, and I've determined that of the 6 hottest rock deep beneath the surface, reachable beneath the surface, 2 of the 6 are in Ada and Owyhee counties. And they now have these oil company derricks that can drill down 1.5 miles and hit that hot rock. And there is a plant being developed in Utah that will be big enough to replace all of the Jim Bridger coal-fired plant. So a 2 gigawatt plant production, would provide all the energy we need. Have you studied that? And is that something that could bring hope to this Treasure Valley as we look at what we could do for the climate future?
That's totally intriguing. I have looked into it. Of course, I'm in the geoscience department. So yes, I have looked into that, and that's exactly the type of thing that we want to be having conversations about. So I think you and I and the geoscience faculty and the engineering folks could have wonderful discussions and about, yes, this is feasible, no, this is not feasible, this is how much heat we would get, no, this is not, and getting it done. So first of all, just getting that question you have on the agenda. So I encourage you to write a little op-ed in the Statesman or something like, could we do this, right? And so the answer how much energy could we really generate? I don't know, but geothermal absolutely we are so lucky in Idaho to have that as part of the solution. Of course, I would argue that the heat source is much closer to the surface in places like Yellowstone National Park, but do we want that there, right? So then we want to think about our impacts on the land. But yeah, I think that's intriguing. So,
hi, Deb LaSalle. Jen, I get to work in a lot of areas of hope. Working with clients on decarbonizing. And so it's inspiring. I work with a lot of mining companies and moving from the big diesel haul trucks to light rail systems that move rock downhill, regenerative brake. Even locally with the school district, looking at geothermal ground source heat pumps for heating. Some great solutions that lower emissions by 90%, lower costs by 90% when you're looking at a 30-year lifespan. But my question is, because I'm one who jumps to solutions. How bad could it really get if we pursue this agenda of drill, baby, drill, purchase Greenland? I'm just going to go out there, right? Purchase Greenland. All the oils and minerals we get from that, all the oil we get from that as we melt the ice caps north of Alaska. There's a ton of oil and gas under there. Lots of folks want it. Russia has a lot in their northern hemisphere that they can... If we were to just abandon this fight against climate change and just be like, meh, let's just go for it, how bad does it get? I guess I've never had that question answered. And do we know? Does at some point the temperature level off, or do we just keep going, or do we know?
Yeah, I mean, it gets bad. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, it's all the horrible movies you've seen. It gets bad, right? And so it gets back to the Cretaceous. I get the question, is this the warmest the Earth has ever been? No, certainly is not the warmest the Earth has ever been. It was much warmer, 70 million years ago. Oh, and by the way, that was a time when it really wasn't very habitable for us humans, right? That's when there were the dinosaurs. So we would go back to a planet situation, both with the pollution and then the other thing is the rate of change, right? So collapse of our ocean ecosystems, for example, could be devastating for life as we know it on Earth. There is no planet B. It's great that people are looking at other planets and other solar systems. This is the one we have. This is the only one we're going to live on, right? And so it could get very bad. And already millions of people are dying due to climate-related illnesses and displacement. So, and it could get very, very bad. So the option is we find solutions. there's not another option. So that's our option. On that cheery note.
This is kind of related. Do we know the carbon dioxide levels after the asteroid hit the planet that killed all the dinosaurs, specifically in comparison to the human-caused increased carbon dioxide levels?
So, of course, that's a great question. And we don't have ice core records, of course, that extend back that far because there wasn't ice. But we're looking at 700 parts per million to up as high as 1,000 parts per million. What's actually comforting to me, and of course now we're at 420 parts per million, what's actually comforting to me, though, is looking at geologic time. And I think getting back to Deb's question, the Earth will keep going. So the Earth will keep going, and some forms of life in some fashion will keep going. I just went to this open mic night the other night, and one of the songs was about the seagulls, cockroaches, and squirrels will survive, was this songwriter's take on it. You know, the world will be inhabited by seagulls, cockroaches, and squirrels. I'm like, wow, okay. So the Earth will keep going, and over time, of course, with the history of our planet, when the Earth first started, there was no life. CO2 concentrations were much, much higher in the atmosphere. And then over time, life itself has regulated the climate for life itself, which is kind of a beautiful thing, right? And that's part of this kind of so-called Gaia hypothesis. So I think that there is a situation that the Earth is a whole group of self-regulating systems where the planet does kind of regulate itself. And so it could be that on scales that I don't understand, economically, everything else, that the scales of climate change will cause kind of this butterfly effect of other changes that may end up regulating the climate. Who knows? So, but yeah, kind of fun to think about. Tom.
Yes, could you elaborate a little bit on the ag water supply situation? It's already a pretty heated political issue between surface water users and groundwater users. Do you see them being impacted the same? Are you talking to the ag community? I know you are, but how are you talking to the ag community, since they seem to be, very shortly impacted by this?
That's a great question, and of course there's the saying in Idaho that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting, right? Absolutely, I think the junior water right holders in years like we're going to see coming up will be pinched. I think the other part that you would certainly relate to is that we are rapidly growing houses on our best soils in our state. And so then that will be another pinch to those producers. Getting back specifically to water, what I would say is I would like kind of each water district to dig into ways in which we can creatively either store water through intentional flood irrigation is one thing they're doing, for example, out in the Teton Valley. That the shift from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation caused a big change in those surface water, groundwater distributions. But could we use more intentional, especially as our snowpack diminishes and we're losing that largest reservoir of our water, how could we more intentionally take earlier rain on snow events or snowmelt runoff and try to recharge those kind of shallow aquifers to buffer our producers? Because otherwise it's looking pretty grim, especially for those junior water right holders. So I think the other thing, actually tying it into development, is how can we better manage? Do we need the same amount of water that we would use to grow alfalfa to water lawns? We don't, right? And so how can we be smarter about our planting systems, et cetera, to take advantage of the water we have? So, all right. Oh, and I put this up here. Fire, if you've not seen this, Google Elemental Reimagine Wildfire don't just Google Elemental, because then you'll get the Disney movie. But if you Google Elemental Reimagine Wildfire, this is a great film. It's available on Netflix, and it talks about just a really thought-provoking great film on fire in our community. So, oh, there's the next one. So, all right, I think I'm done. Thank you very much.